Ron DeSantis don't care about your kids. And by extension, Florida, the government of Florida, don't care about your kids either. Why do I say that? Since the ending of the pandemic, we had certain protections that were in place, especially in regards to our healthcare. These protections were to increase the amount of Medicaid that is being given, especially to children within the state because of the pandemic. But now that pandemic era protections have sundown, essentially, guess what else is sundowning? Kids' healthcare in this state. Let's go to the article really quick because I think this is very important. A lot of people aren't talking about it as much because of what's going on in Gaza. A lot of people talking about foreign policy, but we also have to keep in mind what's going on here domestically. Let me increase the size of this so that you guys can see it all. This is out of your Orlando Sentinel. Some of Florida's sickest kids are losing Medicaid coverage on Easter Sunday. This was a few weeks ago. Remember, everybody, Easter wasn't that long ago. So now, a whole bunch of more kids don't have medical coverage. Let's get into the details. The blurb says advocates for the family scrambled to tell parents how to appeal loss of coverage before it's too late. Now, this talks about Caitlin Marin. And she says she found out her son lost his Medicaid coverage by chance at a routine doctor's appointment. It says her son's physical therapist told Port St. Lucie resident last week that his coverage would expire Sunday, his 10th birthday and Easter this year. Since then, she's been scrambling to make sure that doesn't happen. Says her son Rylan was born with a complex health issues intensified by traumatic brain injury as a toddler. He is immune deficient and relies on a wheelchair, feeding tube, special formula, regular doctor visits, and around-the-clock care. His medical costs are so expensive that even a day without coverage could cost Marin hundreds or thousands of dollars. She missed 2 days of work this week to sort out her son's coverage and file an appeal. Because she filed before Sunday, he's entitled to continuous coverage while the appeal is being heard. She says she never saw any communication with the state telling her she could appeal or even that her son's coverage was up for renewal. So, it says Florida has dropped over 1.3 million people, including 460,000 children from its state Medicaid program since April 1st of 2023. After the end of the pandemic era policy that banned states from removing ineligible participants from health insurance programs for disabled and low income people. I'm telling you this right now. They don't care about you. They don't care about your kids. They don't care about your kids if their kids are sick. And people will say, well, if the parents make enough money, they should be able to afford insurance. These qualifications, this criteria is outdated. How many of you can actually legitimately afford it and be able to save money? You can't. How many of y'all are struggling just to buy food right now? And yet now you also got to worry about your kid not having any medical coverage. And yeah, we can talk about the extreme cases, but what about if your kid has asthma or allergies? Like, how much are you going to pay for your kid's EpiPen? What about their inhaler, their albuterol, right? What if your kid's a type 1 diabetic? And we're talking about not just little kids, but kids all the way up to age 17. And yet, well, if you're not eligible, well, then you don't get coverage anymore. Why? Because you don't make enough. Or you, in a sense, make too much, but you don't make enough to afford good private insurance. Let's continue. Says this month, the state began removing children like Rylan with complex chronic conditions. Eligibility reviews for that group were delayed until now, though they have been though there have been one-off instances over the past year where kids were mistakenly removed despite falling into that category. I just want to stop here for a second. Why are we even allowing for one-off instances for kids to be considered uneligible? Why should we even have eligibility for kids in this country to have health care? Does that sound right to you? Does that sound ethical to you? That some kids should get health care and some kids should not, based on whether their parents can afford it or not? Does that sound right to you? Should healthcare for children even be means tested? Should it? These kids, it is not their fault that they were born to parents that were poor or born to parents that were working class where they make too much to afford Medicaid, but they don't make enough to afford private insurance. It is not their fault. So why in the hell are we punishing them by paywalling their health care? Does that make sense to you? Is that ethical to you? I don't see Ron DeSantis fighting for this. I don't see Ron DeSantis saying, well, we just need to give every kid health care. No, he's not about to do that. Because as a result, local nonprofits have seen a huge uptick over the past 2 weeks calls from panicked parents of Florida kids with cancer, developmental disorders, and other serious conditions, says Miriam Harmatz, founder of the nonprofit Florida Health Justice Project. Most of these children are set to lose coverage on Sunday. Quote, it has to be addressed urgently. For many of these children, if they don't get ongoing coverage, they're going to be hospitalized or face serious risk of terrible outcomes. If you think this is bad now, just wait till the parents have to file for bankruptcy because they can't afford their kids' hospital bills. Because instead of doing preventative care or medicine that maintains their health, once the kid's health diminishes even further and it becomes an emergency situation, then it's going to add more burden to the parents. It's going to add more injury to the insult. Let's continue. Now, Harmatza says that the parents can file an appeal. But hang on. Should the parents even have to? I'd argue that parents shouldn't even have to enroll their kids. Boy, I'm telling you, man. Wow. It says the state has contended throughout this process. They have sent ample notices via phone, email, mail, and online My Access accounts to families whose coverage is up for renewal. Families should have received notice 45 days before renewal date with instructions on how to renew. I'm going to stop it right there. As somebody that lives in Florida, the Department of Children and Families, they get on my nerves because the Department of Children and Families will send you a notice. Look, Medicaid and food stamp recipient here. They'll send you a notice. Oh, well, you need to renew, or we're going to have to call you for a telephone interview to see if you're still eligible for your Medicaid or your food stamps. And they'll send it, and you'll get the letter of notice maybe 1-2 days right before that you need to have it in by. And it's like, wait a minute, you guys wanted me to send this documentation in, but I got the letter almost the day of the deadline. Like, what? And so this is what happens here in Florida. And part of me was thinking, is this just a bureaucratic error? And part of me is thinking, no, this is on purpose because they want you to not meet the deadline so they can take you off the rolls, so that they can save more money because they're fiscally conservative, because they don't want more people on the rolls. This is why they want to get rid of Medicaid. This is why they want to get rid of all these social programs that actually help the poor people, because they don't really want it to be around for people like you and me. They want to say, well, no, you fend for yourself in this capitalist system. And if your kid kicks the bucket, oh, well, I guess you should have been more successful. I guess you should have pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. That's the thought. That is the mindset of people like Ron DeSantis and his god-awful regime. Like, what? Are you kidding me right now? Harmad said, the bottom line is there should be no gap in coverage. As the state has continued throughout this process, they have sent ample notices. Now, which I say that's a load of BS, because even though they did send it out, it's typically right before the deadlines. That's what Florida does. Or they'll say they sent it out, but then there's somebody dropped the ball. It says in an October presentation to Florida legislative officials from DCF and AHCA said that kids with complex chronic conditions would get a specialized processing team and extra outreach efforts during this year-long winding period. DCF and AHCA officials did not immediately respond to questions. Of course they didn't, because, well, yeah. It says children in Florida have without a doubt lost coverage due to paperwork snafus. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra said in an interview Wednesday with the Sentinel. Becerra previously sent a letter to DeSantis and 8 other governors expressing concern about their large number of children who had lost coverage due to red tape. It says about 57% of the people in Florida taken off Medicaid over the last year were removed for procedural reasons, such as not returning a renewal form or incorrectly filling it out, according to nonprofit policy analysis group KFF. How many people who are actually eligible were sent the notices too late and they didn't meet the deadline? Is that their fault, or is that the state of Florida's fault? Man, I tell you. Whew. Florida. Says Health and Human Services finalized rules on Wednesday to aim to keep kids enrolled, but they will take a full year to be fully implemented. Now, here's where some people who are apologists for this system, this is what some of them will say. It says Florida's Children Health Insurance Program, Kid Care, offers free, subsidized, and full pay insurance for kids whose parents who make too much money to qualify for Medicaid. When children lose Medicaid coverage, your application is supposed to automatically be forwarded to Kid Care for review. But as Florida's Medicaid enrollment of children has shrunk by 460,000, Kid Care enrollment only increased by about 55,000 last year. It is unclear whether many of the youths who lost Medicaid now have other insurance. Says a state effort to expand Kid Care to higher income families, predicted to expand coverage to over 42,000 uninsured kids, was supposed to take effect on January 1st under law passed by the legislature last year. And this is the horrible part. Florida is just one of 12 states that lock out children if their families don't pay premiums, a practice banned by the Fed's new rules issued Wednesday. So if you have Kid Care, you have to pay these premiums, right? If you can barely pay for food, then what makes you think you can pay for healthcare? And that's one of the things that's happening here. Let me share this with you guys too. This came out about 6 months ago. Just so that we humanize the people that are being left behind. I want to share this.
When the pandemic hit this country, Congress took action to prevent states from removing Americans from Medicaid coverage. But with the end of the pandemic health emergency, states have now begun that process of clearing their rolls of people who aren't eligible to stay on the program. But as Rachel Scott reports, millions of Americans are mistakenly being removed despite still being eligible. She takes a look at the families caught in the middle in our series, Through the Cracks.
For 5-year-old Penelope, appointments like these have become all too familiar. At such a young age, she's had more visits to the hospital than birthdays, never going longer than a few weeks without sitting in an exam room.
So my understanding is that she's here because she's having staring episodes and they've been seizures in the past, and we wanted to confirm is she still having seizures or not. Is that correct? Right, and then she's scheduled for 48 hours.
Her mother, Jillian, there by her side, longing for the day this won't be their reality.
Oh, you're doing so good.
Penelope was born with classic galactosemia, a rare genetic metabolic disorder that can cause lifelong health complications.
I would spend every dollar if I had to make sure she was okay, because she's just such a fighter.
You're being so good today.
For this family in South Florida, Medicaid is their lifeline, reducing the cost of Penelope's medications.
This first medication she takes for seizures, this is about $1,000.
But in the first week of...
Did you hear that? One medication, $1,000. As somebody that deals with a chronic illness, I recently, a few weeks ago, have started the process in trying to get on the list for a kidney transplant. One of the things that was conveyed to me is that with insurance, the anti-rejection medication that you need post-transplant costs $200 to $500 per month with insurance. How do you expect transplant patients to survive when you have to pay that much just for your meds? That's a luxury car payment. So what about the rest of us that are making close to minimum wage? By the way, right now, minimum wage in Florida is $12 an hour. And the only reason why it's $12 an hour is because through a ballot initiative, we set it to increase to $15 an hour by 2026. And that's nowhere near what we need. And yet, now they expect us to cough up all this money for these medications. You have a mother here and a father that had to put out $1,000 just for a kid's medication. And they have to fear they have to pay because their kid taking off the Medicare rolls, the Medicaid rolls. Now they have to cough up that money that they don't have because they don't want their kid to die. Here come the pro-lifers. Oh my God, we care about the kids. We care about the kids. Save the children. Prove it. And you liberals, you guys ain't getting off the hook either. Because you guys will say, oh my God, healthcare is a human right. Prove it. Because if you actually thought that healthcare is a human right, you guys would be getting people out there in the streets right now. But you don't believe it either. So you got two groups that don't believe that healthcare is a human right. Liberals and conservatives. This is why we talk about leaving the both parties. This is why you have to leave the duopoly, because neither one of them believe in actually having healthcare as a human right in the state, in this country.
May, Jillian and her husband Rocky say they found out their daughter had unexpectedly lost her healthcare coverage. Just as states began to roll back pandemic-era protections, removing millions from their rolls.
When did you learn that Penelope lost coverage?
My occupational therapist texted me and said she's no longer on our Medicaid list. She's been dropped. And it was just like, this has to be a mistake.
What was going through your mind? I eventually had a complete breakdown. Like the day you called, I was crying all day. It was just so overwhelming. It's so defeating. My whole life is taking care of her. I'm her caretaker. And I felt like a bad mom. Like, yes, oh my, like she'll get less care because she doesn't have insurance. And that's the truth.
Job.
I'm so grateful for Medicaid because of
we couldn't do
we
it.
couldn't do it.
Yeah,
We couldn't do it.
It would be impossible.
Jillian is a registered nurse, but
Now, the reason why I'm showing this is because I want people to really think about the human aspects of this. There's a great movie that I'm not sure if all of you have seen. It stars Denzel Washington. It's called John Q. If you have not watched that movie, I highly recommend that you do, because it really puts a mirror against the healthcare system in this country. Imagine how these parents feel. If you're a parent, imagine how they feel. where you cannot afford your kids' medical expenses. And is it their fault that their kid is sick? Is it the kid's fault that they were born, that they so happen to be born to parents that don't make that much money? And the last thing you heard was the mom is a registered nurse and they're struggling. Now, some people would be like, well, they just need to spend their money better. Oh, I thought she did all the right things by going to school. I thought she did all the right things by getting an education. She's in a very respected field. She's an RN. And yet she can't afford the expenses to take care of her child because of her child having a chronic illness. And yet now you're going to say, well, they would need to spend their money better. I'm telling y'all, this is why I'm a communist, y'all. Yep. Ooh, boy. About to get me riled up. All right, let's continue.
Couldn't do
It
it.
would be impossible.
Jillian is a registered nurse, but she says the insurance process has been difficult to navigate, spending hours on the phone trying to get answers.
Do you know why Penelope was kicked off of her coverage?
Ultimately, I don't. They didn't even tell me that I was dropped. I didn't, and I went through all of my letters to see where I was dropped, and there was absolutely not a single letter in my profile online.
You've gotten no answer.
No answers whatsoever.
Across the country, federal officials estimate at least 1.5 million Americans have lost their Medicaid coverage since April. For the last 3 years, states were barred from kicking people off the program. That's all changed now that the pandemic-era rules have been lifted, and it's sparking confusion across the nation. In Tallahassee, Liz Adams says her 7-year-old son in remission for leukemia was dropped with no explanation.
We went 6 months back into our emails and our spam, and there was nothing. There was no notifications from them at all. Emotionally, it's been taxing, to say the least.
In Gravette, Arkansas, Allison Corder says by the time she found a mailed notice from the state, her and her son were already uninsured.
I've moved since then. I've gotten a million letters in the mail, and it's just really confusing what they're wanting from me.
And in Clay County, Florida,
That's another thing. I'm going to repeat what she said.
Gotten a million letters in the mail, and it's just really confusing what they're wanting from me.
And in
A lot of times, these processes are so convoluted, and they want so many different details that it determines whether you're eligible or not. Like, for instance, let's say you have a retirement account, right? Let's say you have a 401k or something like that. And let's say your 401k, let's say you saved up like $60,000 for retirement so far. Guess what? If you apply for Medicaid, you have to report that. And that may make you ineligible, even though you're saving for retirement. To them, it's like, well, you can access that money and you can use that to pay the expenses. Come to us when you have no retirement left and no money left, and then we'll help you. But then guess what? Now your retirement's gone because you had to pay one expense that was $55,000, and now you have no retirement left over. So then by the time you retire or you get to retirement age, you have to keep working because you have to take that money out. And by the way, if it's a 401k, you also get a penalty. So you don't get to take all that money out because the government, by taxes, will take some of that money out too. So then you're left with no retirement, having to work until you die, and Who got all that money? Big Pharma got all that money. The medical industrial complex got all that money. All for you to not even be able to live the rest of your life after you worked so hard all that time. Yes, that's how it works. They want to know how much your car is worth. They want to know how many assets you got. It's all, and that's because it's means tested. It is crazy. And don't have a lot of money in your savings account. You better not have a savings account with more than one zero. If it's a number followed by 2 zeros, oh, they're gonna be looking at you like, why you got that much money in your account? That's how it works. How do I know? I've been involved with Medicaid since I was a little boy. I've been through the process. Medicaid and food stamps. That's how they look at you. They look at you they go through you with a fine-tooth comb. And you better have that stuff in on time, or you get axed. It's not fair, man.
In Clay County, Florida, Marnie Harvich says her 13-year-old daughter, Cassidy, who relies on a ventilator to breathe, was almost kicked off of Medicaid prematurely.
It's insane. Not only are you fighting to keep them insured, you're fighting to keep them alive.
These families, all part of the 15 million Americans who could lose coverage as states begin tightening the rules. The problem, with such a big undertaking, Medicaid officials estimate half of those Americans could be dropped by mistake.
7 million people who are eligible to receive Medicaid could still actually lose their coverage. Why?
See what happens when you means test? This is what happens when you means test. Because then there's certain people who are ineligible and then people who may get dropped by mistake. If healthcare is a human right, it should not be means tested. And here we are. And then you'll get some people who fall by the wayside.
Why is that happening?
So that is one of the pieces I mentioned that is a paramount concern to us, and why it's been a how do we move heaven and earth moment over the past 2 years. We should not accept that as success or how we think about what we're trying to achieve is. We need to make sure we do everything, federal, state, the private sector, other partners, to keep everybody eligible, enrolled.
Daniel Sy.
The private sector, see, this is the problem with people in this position. The private sector does not care about keeping you enrolled because their job is to deny you while you keep paying them premiums, while you pay deductibles. That's how they make their money, because they don't actually want to pay for your health care. This is why healthcare needs to be taken out of private hands. And by taking it out of private hands, I also mean taking money out of politics so that it's no longer influenced. It's no longer influencing public policy. Healthcare should no longer be commodified whatsoever. We need a full nationalization of our healthcare industry now, yesterday, ahora. That's what we need. And you're going to have people like this guy hand-wringing about, oh, we're trying to do the best we possibly can. You can't do that much if your boss isn't pushing for it. Who is their boss? Joseph Biden.
I is a director at CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the federal agency overseeing the process. He says procedural errors, misnotices, and confusion are all in part to blame for eligible recipients losing coverage. CMS says it has been pushing states to streamline the process.
And a lot of the strategies and options we've been putting on the table are options for states to help be able to do more upfront automated renewals.
Are some states resistant toward that change?
There's more to do. And indeed, some states have taken us up on every option and strategy that we put on the table.
For the states that are not following these guidelines, what action is being taken?
If we find that even with the best intentions or not, if the federal rules are not being followed, folks should expect us to take and use every lever at our disposal.
At least 25 states so far have started disenrolling people from Medicaid. Florida dropping 303,000. Arkansas, some 110,000.
This is a really heavy lift. We see mistakes are made. Families don't get the letter. They don't understand the letter. They have a hard time getting help.
In an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, Arkansas's Republican Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders says, "We're simply removing ineligible participants from the program to reserve resources for those who need them and follow the law." But advocates in
Hang on. Because here's my thing. If we had a fully nationalized healthcare system, the states wouldn't need to pay for it. That means people wouldn't need to be kicked off the rolls. If we had a fully nationalized healthcare system, we wouldn't need Medicaid in the first place. Hell, we wouldn't even need a healthcare insurance program. If it's fully nationalized, then there you go. Everybody gets healthcare. Everybody. No tiers. Not one person having more than another. No premiums, no deductibles, no co-pays. All you got to do is just pay your taxes. And if you're the type of person that's like, well, I don't want to pay more in taxes. All right, then slash the military budget. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. That's all we got to do. Slash the military budget. Boom. There you go. It's not that hard. The people who make it hard are the people that don't want you to actually have it. That's who makes it hard. And I know some people going, oh, JB, you want the government to run healthcare? You want the corporations to run healthcare? And I'm not saying that I want the government to be running healthcare while the corporations are puppeting the government. No, I'm saying get money out of politics, get rid of the corruption, and have the people actually running the government instead of the corporations owning our government. That's the whole reason why we're in this mess in the first place, because the corporations own it. Government is like a hammer. Whether you put it in the hands of a maniac, a maniacal murderer, or you put it in the hands of a builder, depends on how that hammer is used. I am not going to put a hammer in the hands of a Charles Manson. No. Now, if you give that hammer to Bob Vila, for some of us that are that age, right? Then okay, you feel safer, right? Charles Manson with a hammer, Bob Vila with a hammer. Which one shall we choose? Stop putting the hammer in the hands of a Charles Manson. Who's that? The corporate overlords, the corporate dictators, the predator class. That's the Charles Manson that you're putting a hammer in the hands of. Versus you put it in the hands of a Bob Vila, then you might just get a nice birdhouse. You might just get an extra bedroom. You might just get some crown molding. You might get a brand new deck built in your backyard. But only if you actually take that hammer out of the hands of the axe murderer. That's how government works. Government is a tool. Whoever wields it in the way that they wish. So when people go, oh my God, government's the problem. Look, you know how y'all love to say guns don't kill people, people kill people? Governments don't harm people. The people who actually are behind running the government, that's the problem. Y'all need to get out of that Reagan plantation mindset. Let's continue.
And experts are concerned that potentially thousands, especially children, are slipping through the cracks.
We know that the vast majority of children who may lose coverage during this process will remain eligible for Medicaid.
Florida's Department of Children and Families says it has developed a robust outreach campaign, including up to 13 direct contact attempts to recipients who do not submit a timely application. While the state declined to comment on Penelope's case due to privacy concerns, a spokesperson maintained everyone that is removed from Medicaid receives a final notice informing them the reason for termination. But Jillian and Rocky say they are still looking to the state of Florida for answers. After several weeks of calls and working with an advocacy group, they were finally able to get their daughter Penelope back on Medicaid, at least until the end of the review process.
Penelope now is covered through March of next year. Is that temporary relief? Do you fear that she could still lose her coverage in a year?
Hang on. The review process. Do you know how much money that costs just to pay people to review each case? Instead of just nationalizing and giving everybody health care, you wouldn't need to have all those caseworkers, all those people in administrative. You wouldn't need them. Like John Q said in the movie, sick, help. Sick, help. Why are we paywalling it?
Or waiting for the other shoe to drop. I don't trust it, because if this can happen, it can happen again.
Right. It's just very simple questions and still don't have answers. No one still knows why. I mean, someone denied it. They don't know why. No one's held accountable.
An absolute nightmare for those parents and so many families. Our thanks to Rachel Scott for that eye-opening report.
So this is why it is so important that we focus on what we can do when it comes to things like this. Now, a couple of years back, we did the March for Medicare for All. That was great to raise awareness for people who want to push for healthcare for everybody. There are things that can be done. The long game is building community with other people, joining different organizations. I actually talked about this yesterday on my channel. Joining organizations so that you can find like-minded people in order to build dual power. There's also the option of citizen ballot initiatives. Now, I actually talked about this and I shared the website a couple weeks back on the Savvy and JB show, where it talks about how citizen ballot initiatives are brought about, what they are, and what they mean. So citizen ballot initiatives can be a way to mitigate the damage that's done to those of us who are workers and also give us more power because it's direct democracy. You're not depending on a politician to get anything done. You are actually circumventing the politician, going outside of them in order to actually affect the law from the voter perspective. And so that's another way of getting it done, is through citizen ballot initiatives. Now, different states have more freedom when it comes to ballot initiatives than others. And I think I have that site. Let's see if I have that website. I'll find it. But my point is, that's another way that you can actually push for something. So, doing work on the ground, building dual power, as well as doing something through ballot initiatives. So that's something that we can do in the interim. So that's, we all know how horrible it is, but let's not kid ourselves in thinking it's just the government by itself. It's who's behind the government. It is not us. Because if it was us, a lot of things would be different, right? Take a look at Florida. What did Florida do? Florida passed a law where it allowed people who are formerly incarcerated to be able to vote after they've served their time. What did the Florida legislature do? They put economic barriers in front of those people who are formerly incarcerated, because they do not want people who know what it's like to be victims of the carceral system to vote. They don't want them to have that power. But through a citizen ballot initiative, we, the voters, said, oh, yeah, they served their time. Yeah, they should be able to vote again. Give them that right again. But the legislator, the executive branch of the state of Florida, they didn't like that. So guess what? They undermined it. Because who is behind them? The corporate dictators, the predator class. That's who's behind them. Imagine if the predator class and the corporate dictators were not behind them. What if it was us? They'd be able to vote again. A lot of things would be different. Our free speech wouldn't be hindered by people like us. But because a lackey, a corporate lapdog, guess what? He's going to do with the corporation what the landlords want. He's going to do what the real estate developers want. That's who he is. So ultimately, we have to build dual power that's outside of the system, as well as use our tools as our advantage to mitigate the damage to those of us who are workers in this system.